All right, welcome to another Flutter meetup, everyone. We're gonna start off with Johnny Pepin. He's gonna just give us a little 30-second intro about dev community. Johnny, you wanna say a few words?
Yeah, and I'll keep it to 20, but don't time me.
Right.
Thanks everybody for joining. So this is a DC Flutter and Google Developer Group joint event. Super awesome to have everybody here. If you're interested in more of these types of events or any of our other groups, if you go to devcommunity.org, you can see all those there. Right now we have 9 different partner groups as part of devcommunity.org. So check it out, join us there and on Twitter. And if you noticed on the meetup space, there's a little logo in the top corner for this meetup, that little DC logo, that's us. So check it out.
Devcommunity.org, right? Yep.
Devcommunity.org. Yep.
There's the YouTube channel for them also that this session is also going to be recorded, and there's prior sessions there that's been uploaded. All right, thanks a lot, Johnny. All right, so I guess we can commence. We got Faisal Abid, the technopreneur galore, I can say. Well, Faisal is kind of special to me because he's the person I found out about Flutter. I heard about Flutter for the first time. Tongue twister there. It was 2017 August. I remember very well. It was Android Summit. Do you remember that, Faisal?
Yeah, I do.
And it was a 2.5-hour workshop, and so Faisal was on stage just talking about Flutter, and I was in the beginning I was like, oh, is this going to be another Xamarin or something like that? But then I was sold on it. I was sold on it because of all the reasons that if you're knowledgeable about Flutter, already. And that was like 0.3 days, I think, something like that. Now we're at 2.0, a very seminal time for Flutter. And Faisal is, I think, one of the first, if I'm not mistaken, Faisal, one of the first GDEs on Flutter, as far as I remember.
Yeah, there was like 2 of us when it started.
Yep. Right, exactly. So anyway, it's been 3.5 years, Faisal, and here we are, still talking about Flutter. So I'll just, pass it on to you. Just, go at
Cool.
it.
Yeah, when Flutter was first announced, I was sitting in the front row and I saw Eric Seidel talk about it, and I was very excited. And like you, I thought it was going to be, it's just going to be like another Cordova or something technology.
Right, exactly.
But it turned out to be actually very cool. And here we are talking about Flutter. So Flutter 2 came out. I'm going to present my screen here. Flutter 2 came out, and I thought I would kind of give like a recap as well as things that I found to be very interesting in the Flutter 2 announcements and things you should know about Flutter 2. If you are a mega expert on Flutter, this talk might be boring, but if you're learning Flutter, if you're understanding what Flutter is all about, this talk can be very interesting from both a technical standpoint as well as a business standpoint. And after the talk, we can have a Q&A and get into both more deeper. So let's get started. 5 things you should know about Flutter 2. I realized as I was doing the slides, there's probably 7 things, but whatever, we'll see. The first thing that is very important is the partnerships and the technology that's happening, right? Like Barra said, Flutter is just 3 years old. And if you really think about it, 3 years for technology is not a long time. Especially at the adoption that Flutter is getting. It's pretty wild that it has been able to get this far in just 3 years. A lot of people criticize that Flutter is just very early on. They go to the GitHub and look at the GitHub issues and complain about those. But if you really look at who's using Flutter, that is a big testament. And so one of the things that was announced at Flutter Engage, which is a conference that happened a month ago, and if you haven't seen it, I recommend you go check it out on YouTube, is that they made a couple partnerships. One specific one that I want to talk about, and it's kind of the theme of Flutter 2, is one with Toyota. And this one's very interesting because if you think about Toyota, you're probably wondering, well, is now Toyota making laptops, mobile phones now? But the reality is Flutter from day one is kind of designed to be this technology that runs anywhere, right? If you think about, if you're old enough, you probably have heard of a technology called Flash. And if you are new to tech or in the past 5 years, you probably know of a technology called Unity. Unity is based a lot on Flash. Flash is like kind of like the grandfather of all tools of this write one, run everywhere. I guess Java is too in a lot of ways, the JVM stuff. But if you look at what Flash was, Flash had a language. Flash was a runtime that ran on your browser, just like Unity is. So Unity runs on your browser. Unity runs on all mobile phones, TVs, refrigerators, absolutely anywhere that Unity needs to run on, Unity can. And Flash did the same thing back in the day. And the idea was we should, as developers, be able to write our code once and deploy it absolutely anywhere. And this promise has been brought up over and over again. We talked about this with HTML5. Once Flash kind of faded out, HTML5 came up, and everyone thought about, okay, we're going to replace native apps with HTML5 apps. And that promise is sort of living there. HTML5 apps have their own issues, but you can technically create a complete HTML5 app and have it run on desktop, mobile, wherever, right? Browser. The issue that you find with a lot of HTML5 apps is performance, as well as the rich native animations and the feature set, frankly. When you have a native app running, you have access to a wide range of features that you don't when you're just running a web app in a browser or even a progressive web app. And so Flutter kind of took this approach and said, okay, we want Flutter to run absolutely everywhere. And for those who are new in the audience, Flutter is just a framework. Dart is the language that actually powers the framework. So Google said, we want Flutter to run absolutely everywhere. And they designed the Flutter rendering engine so that it can run originally on mobile. And so they designed it for Android and iOS. But then they said, well, why don't we just take this rendering engine and we put it on, say, desktop? What about we put it on the browser? And that's a little asterisk there. We'll talk about how it does browser stuff in a bit. But they said, well, why don't we just build a rendering engine that can take our Flutter framework code that you just written in Dart and just deploy it anywhere. And this partnership with Toyota is a testament to how far they've come. You theoretically, if Toyota gives you access to their cars, you can actually write a Flutter app today and deploy it on your Android and iOS. Then you can actually deploy it on Windows, Mac, and Linux. And then you can also deploy it in the browser. And lastly, you can deploy it on this Toyota car, right, in their dashboard. So wherever that rendering engine works, you can run your Flutter app. And that's truly a great business case. If you are thinking about building apps in Flutter, or if you need to convince your boss, since Flutter 2 came out, you might be interested. You want to talk to your boss about this, talk to them about the partnerships and how far the technology has come. So that's what I wanted to start off with, because there's a lot of good developments that have happened. But if you kind of think about the scope of what Flutter's kind of evolving into, then all the other technical changes make a lot of sense. So let's go to part two. The second point, which is Flutter 2 is a free upgrade. And what's cool about this is, in a lot of ways, obviously it's monetarily free, it's open source, but it's also a free upgrade where most of the time you won't have to make any code changes, right? You can just go Flutter upgrade on your Mac, and I will actually show you how that works. So if I pull up Terminal here, here's another app I'm going to talk about in a second. But what I can do here is I can say, okay, Flutter upgrade. And when I do Flutter upgrade, I'm already upgraded, but it says, great, I'm going to update Flutter to Flutter 2.0.4, right? And within a few moments, you're now on the latest Flutter and your app works, and your app will take advantage of all the new performance improvements. There might be some weird issues you might run into, but we'll talk about that in a second. But aside from that, your app will just work. And that is one of the powerful features of Flutter. Google takes a lot of care into making sure that they're not just going to abandon you. And so when you do write an application and say Flutter 1.22, which was the most stable one, I believe, or 1.26, just like a year ago, your application won't be abandoned. You won't have to spend like 60 hours refactoring your application. So that is the free upgrade. Now, here's where it gets really cool. There's also a third free upgrade here. The third free upgrade is if you have an app right now that is not using anything native specific. So what I mean by that is if your Flutter app isn't like talking to the phone's contact book, or it's not talking to, say, the phone, the GPS, then what you could do is just by running Flutter upgrade, right? Your app automatically now runs in the browser, right? And your app automatically now runs on desktop. That is, Google's doing all this free work for you. The Dart team has just made it so that once you write your app once, it can run anywhere. So I'm going to give you an example here. Here's an app called Flutter Folio. You can actually go and download this app at flutter.gskinner.com. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to run this app. Where is it? Yeah, well, right here. So I'm going to go and I'm going to run this app right here. And I'm going to create an account. So let's create an account here, test@test.com. 1, 2, 3. Oh, of course. Wow. Okay. So I've created an account here. Now this website seems fairly straightforward, but this is actually a Flutter web app. And this Flutter web app is using 95%, I would say, the same code throughout all its platforms. You can run this app on web, you can run this app on desktop, you can run this app on your phone. So let's take a look how it runs on the web. So I'm going to click create your first folio here. And then I'm going to say plus, and I'm going to hit images here. And it says import images. I'm going to open up import images. And I'm going to find this image of this random dude watching TV. And then it uploads the image. And now I can click add to page. I don't even know why I have this image on my desktop. And so now I can play around with this image, right? And you can see that it's fairly smooth. It might not appear as that much on Zoom because of latency and screen sharing, but I urge you to go to flutterfolio.com and check it out. There are some issues. If you were to ask me even today, is Flutterweb ready for production? I would say yes, but keep in mind that there are still some issues when it comes to SEO, when it comes to performance on different browsers. Right now, Flutterweb works amazing on Chrome. It works amazing on desktop Chrome. But if you were to run this on, say, Firefox, and I will do that right now, you will see that it doesn't run the best. Now, let me just open up Firefox here. All right. And the reason why is fairly technical, but there's different ways. The web is very complicated. And when we were originally talking about how, nice, it works fairly okay, actually. When we were originally talking about the rendering engine, unlike Flash or Unity, where they actually have a plugin on the browser, what the Flutter team did was they took a different approach. And I think it's the right approach. We don't want another plugin. What they did was they said, let's take Flutter and actually convert it into JavaScript and HTML elements. So if you actually look at the source code for your Flutter web app, so I'm going to right click, I'm going to go view source. I can't right click because it's disabled. I'm going to go view developer tools, and I look at elements here. You can see that this is a completely custom HTML tag called FLT glass pane. It has a canvas and it's drawing stuff to a canvas, but it's also doing some tricks there for accessibility so that screen readers can pick it up. All that, long story short, to say, Flutterweb is ready for production. However, it's not ready for something that you want to build a very high performance website. It's great for building high performance web apps. So if you're building internal CRM tools, even external user-facing apps, it's great for it. But if you're building like a website, say you're thinking of building your landing page for your startup with just some sign up and stuff, I wouldn't say go with Flutter. I would say stick with Bootstrap or React or Vue. However, if you're building like a very high-powered custom SaaS application, like, for example, iRobot did, and let me show you guys what iRobot did here. iRobot web application. I should have saved this link, but let's see if I can find it. 1 second. iRobot. No, I can't find it. But if you go search up iRobot's web application, that is built in Flutter, but it is a very custom environment where kids are programming and writing custom tools for their iRobot Roombas, and that's built in Flutter. So keep that in mind for Flutterweb. There's also some performance issues. You might see your CPU spike and stuff, so keep all that in mind. Now, despite all that, it's still quite an achievement that you can take your regular Flutter app and actually deploy it on the web. Now what I can do is I can actually deploy the same thing on my Mac. And here's the same thing. It's not logged into the same account. This is another account that I'm logged into. But here's the same app running on Mac. And it's, like I said, 95% the same code base. The 5%, it has to do with you writing code to determine screen size, you writing code to determine where the app is running. So perhaps you don't want your application to have drag and drop, for example, when it's running on mobile, but you want drag and drop when it's running on desktop. So you would write these little helper scripts, helper classes for you to basically say, if my app runs on Mac, then I want it to do this. If my app runs on Windows, then I want it to do this. And that's what Flutterfolio's done. There's some subtle interaction changes when it's running on web or desktop or mobile. So aside from that, most of the code is identical. And so that is this free upgrade that Flutter keeps talking about. And when you start writing your applications, perhaps you're just writing a mobile app right now, but soon if your product manager or your users say, hey, can we get a web app? Within probably, depending on the complexity of your mobile app, within less than a month, you can probably get a web app running very quickly with the same application. And if you have any questions, just bookmark them and we can talk about them right after the talk. So with that, and you can see my browser is actually performing slightly weird. And that's actually because of that web app that's running in the background. Flutterfolio by Grant Skinner does have some sort of memory leak going on. So I'm just going to kill it here. All right. So the next one is probably the more complicated one. And this is, and that's my notes. This is the upgrades to the Dart language. And I would say this is optional, but I would also say this is very much needed. And what Google did was they created this idea of null safety. What is null safety? It's this idea that your variables shouldn't be null. If you have null variables in your application, then you're prone to errors. And so what null safety does is something very interesting. And this has been a long time coming. In the past, like 3-4 years, the Dart team, specifically the compiler team, has been working very hard to figure out how can we migrate existing code easily and have this robust type system that Flutter has, as well have null safety, so that if I want, I can ensure that no variables in my application are going to be null. And if they are, then I'm explicitly saying, yes, this should be null, right? And so I'm going to give you guys an example here. This is what I had in my other terminal. So I'm going to actually kill this. So I have an app here called BRCC. And BRCC is a massive, massive app. It has millions of lines of code. It's just pretty wild. And in this application, this is a Flutter 1.2 application. And so if I want to upgrade this to Flutter 2, I can do it fairly quickly. I just need to go Flutter upgrade. However, I want all the benefits of null safety. And so what I have to do here is I have to run something called Dart migrate. And so I'm going to run Dart migrate. And what Dart migrate will do, and this is, again, Google making it very easy for you to upgrade. Dart migrate will go through your code, and the compiler will analyze all the different interaction points that it can and figure out what parts of your code should be, have optional nulls in it, and what part of your code you can remove null completely from it and make it and tell the compiler that this variable can never be null. And when I run it, you'll notice something. And this is one of the more annoying things, to be honest, is that if your application has a lot of dependencies, you're going to run into this issue. And it's going to say something like error. Before migrating your package, we recommend ensuring that every library it imports has been migrated to Null Safety. If you have an application with tons and tons of dependencies, migration is not going to be easy unless all those packages have been automatically converted. However, for the sake of the demo, you can still ignore this, though I would never recommend this, but you can go skip import check. And what it would do, it's just going to go through it now. And the reason why I didn't update the dependencies, because I know that some of these dependencies in this application are so old, they're never going to be upgraded. So I have to go in manually and fix it. But anyways, I'm going to say skip import check. And something very interesting happens. It skips the import check, but now it creates an entire UI for me to actually go line by line in my application and upgrade my application to be Dart, to be null safe. So it gives me this new URL. I can click this URL and I can go to it directly. And you can see that here is the entire source code of the application. And I can click on any parts of this source code and I can say, you know what, let's see how a count would look. And it's giving me new syntax that you might not know about. It's giving me this question mark syntax. It's giving me the exclamation mark syntax. And what basically at a high level, what this is telling the compiler is there is a possibility that this could be null. And then it's also telling the compiler, hey, don't worry about this. This is never going to be null. Trust me, I know, because I've written this code, whatever. I know there's no chance of this being null. And what you could do is you can just go over it, kind of look at everything and say, you know what, all of this makes sense, and just hit apply migration. And when you hit apply migration, it's going to go and it's going to go through your entire code base line by line and automatically apply this migration for you. In most applications, this should be fine. In applications that are very old or legacy, and when I mean old, I mean like 1.22 and up, then you might have an issue and you will have to probably spend probably another like week or so kind of making sure that everything works fine. There's no issues happening in your application once you've migrated to Null Safety. The thing that I do recommend is before you run Null Safety migration is you have unit tests. That way you can ensure that your application won't break. And that way, once you run migration, you can just run the unit test, run it on CI/CD, pass it with flying colors, and you know that your application is great. So moving forward, and what I'm going to do is make sure I don't accidentally commit all this. I'm going to hit git stash because I do not want to commit all that. Okay, moving forward. We talked about Flutterweb, so I'm not going to talk about that more. But what I'm going to get into is something called Flutter Fix. And Flutter Fix is a new, or Dart Fix actually, is a new command that as you're running your application, typically when you're running your application, you have something at the bottom here that says Dart analysis, right? And sometimes you might have a lot. This is a very simple application, so it just has one line here. What Dart Fix does is it automatically goes and fixes the analysis errors for you, right? And this is a very easy way to kind of clean up your code and not have these lingering warnings that we all seem to ignore. This is a good way to always ensure your code is up to date and you're not going to run into weird errors. So I'm going to give an example of this. There is a Dart analysis error here. avoid interpolation when it's not needed. And so what I can do here is I can go Dart Fix, blah, blah, blah. It's going to say, okay, do you want to do Dart Fix apply? I'm going to say, yep. Dart Fix, oops. Oh, my bad. And it's computing fixes, whatever it's going to find in my application. It's a fairly easy application. And then it's just going to go and fix them, right? For larger code bases, this is amazing. I've never seen, there we go. It said, great, it made one fix, unnecessary brace and string interpolation. Great, thank you, it's fixed. And if I go back to Dart analysis, everything's cleaned up. I have yet to run into an issue where this has caused me pain. I actually ran it on that sample app that I was just talking to you guys about, that that million line code app, where it had tons and tons of warnings from random developers who touched it. So I did Dart Fix and it cleaned it up completely. And though it's not going to fix usually any bugs, but it's going to prevent you from making bugs in the future, and it's just going to keep your code nice and clean. So highly recommend you take a look at Dart Fix.
Faisal, real quick,
Now,
does this, just to interject a quick question, does this have is there a dry run option?
Yes, there is. Before you do that, so you can go Dart Fix dash dry run.
Okay, all right.
And it's going to do the same thing. It's going to run in dry run. Exactly. Cool. So now might as well, we're in this project. So I'm going to talk to you guys about new widgets that were introduced that not a lot of people know about, actually. It's not like there's been a handful of widgets. There's only 2 widgets that were introduced. One of them is kind of boring, but is interesting if you're building very complicated applications with a lot of nested UI. Commonly, what things that most developers run into when they're building nested Flutter UIs is the idea of managing your context and your scaffold. Sometimes what will happen, and almost every developer run into this, is when they show a snack bar or when they show an alert dialog, sometimes it's using the wrong that's being deleted. Some weird magic usually happens as you're developing, and your application will show an error. And so Google saw this is a common occurrence. Oh, it said my connection was unstable. I hope I'm good still. Google saw that this is a common occurrence, so they built this idea of Scaffold Messenger. And what Scaffold Messenger does is it figures out the right scaffold to show your snack bar in, right? And so you can go Scaffold Messenger, and you have Messenger, and then you can say Messenger dot, and you have a couple of methods here. The one that's most commonly used here is show snack bar. And you can show that snack bar on the right scaffold at all times, and it will work. Kind of an underwhelming demo, so I'm going to actually show another good widget that is pretty cool. So here's my sample app, and there has been a couple of ways to do this before Flutter 2, but nothing native and nothing as robust as what I'm about to show you. And this is a dropdown, right? So everyone knows what a autocomplete dropdown is. So I'm going to type in, it says what programming language to use. So I'm going to type in DART. And as you can see, this isn't anything special. No one should be too impressed by this. This is just doing an autocomplete on a text view. Sounds good. However, what's very impressive about this is I have full control over this autocomplete widget. So this widget is called autocomplete. And what I'm able to do is I'm able to pass in an actual widget to when it's auto-completing. So let me show you what I mean by that. I can change this and I can say, I'm going to call this to be row. Actually, I'm going to call it to be a list tile. And I'm going to have the title say elements. And I'm going to have the leading, have an icon. Email, sure. Okay. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to type in Dart, and there we go, right? Within a couple of just, with Flutter Magic, which is just the idea of widget fits inside of a widget, I can have a powerful autocomplete dropdown very quickly. And so here, I'm able to type in Dart, and I get the list tile now with the email icon and Dart. Now, what's really cool about this is I can actually decide right here, hold on, list of widgets. So I can actually decide what views to show here. So I have list of widgets here. And then, so as I'm getting elements back, I can actually say, you know what, only match elements which have more than 2 characters, only match elements which have more than 3 characters. So I have this full freedom when I'm designing my autocomplete widget. You can actually go pretty crazy here, and you can start choosing, for example, image.network, and you can pass in an image URL here. So I can search up Dart Flutter. Actually, I have an image right here. So I can take this image and I can put it in here, and I can have dynamic image loading as people are doing autocomplete. Now, I have to say that last time I did this, it broke because I didn't have any caching, but there we go. Right, it's working fine because it's just one image. If you try to dynamically load images, it's going to crash because it's making like 50 network calls all at once. So you'll need some sort of thread pool loader there. But with that in mind, the autocomplete widget is actually very powerful, and you don't have to use yet another existing widget for it. And like I was talking about, you can actually choose here how you want your logic to work. So whenever text is written, I can say, go to my languages array here, which is up here where I wrote down all the programming languages. I can say, go to the language array here where the suggestion contains whatever the user is typing, right? But I can equally say if value.text.length is greater than 3, no, is less than 3, then return nothing, right? So you need to type in at least 3 characters for this autocomplete to work. And I can go D, nothing happens, A, nothing happens, R, nothing happens. And then when I type in the 4th one, there we go. It automatically chose it. So this is very powerful. And if you think about, this is just matching on text, but you can actually start getting to match only on images. You can build something very powerful here where it can connect to some network API, do some, algorithm in the cloud, and return back some results. So you have a lot of freedom with this autocomplete widget. And that goes back to this idea of how powerful Flutter is becoming, where because the language is built on this Lego block model that I like to call it, where any block fits into another block, you can actually extend it to make some very custom features that, coming from an Android developer background for like past 10 years, this would have been so hard to do, where you would just go to your product manager and say, we just need to come up with another way of doing this, because this is actually very hard. There's so much moving parts, but with Flutter, it's super simple. And then lastly, before we go to questions and stuff, let's talk about Firebase plugins and Google Ads. And I think this is like the 6th one in my list of 5 things to talk about. But this is interesting because Firebase plugins have been all updated. And the really good thing about this is more and more Flutter developers are relying on Firebase. And so Google is showing, about a year ago, I heard someone say to me, well, Google's not keeping the Firebase plugins up to date. I think they don't care about Flutter and Firebase. But this is factually not true anymore, because they're updating the plugins very often. In fact, they're almost compatible with the JavaScript plugin. There's probably 1 or 2 things sometimes that are missing here and there, but nothing too critical. It's usually some obscure filter that most developers don't use. So definitely Firebase plugins is the right approach still if you want to use Firestore, Firebase database, push notifications, all that, use the new Firestore plugins. But the really cool thing that Flutter did was come out with Google Ads, We all hate ads, but developers also love making money off ads. If you go to Google Ads, there is an official Google Ads package now. But the really cool thing about this is native. And when I say native is, this is not like the Google Ads package of before, where you had like a Android or iOS view sitting on top of your Flutter app. This is actually injected right into your Flutter app. And so it is also just a view. And what you can do with that view is you can put it inside, it's just a widget, I mean. And what you can do that widget is you can put it inside any other application, right? Any other widget. And so you can take that widget and throw it in an autocomplete if you want to, and you'll have Google Ads showing in your autocomplete widget. So Google's making, one of the core thing that I wanted to get across when I was thinking about these 5, 6 things was with Flutter 2, Google's kind of attacked this, their PR, as well as just the idea of Flutter in a couple approaches. Number one, we're talking about partnerships, and Google's making a lot of partnerships in the Flutter ecosystem. The other partnership that I didn't even mention about is the partnership with Canonical, that are the makers of Ubuntu. Moving forward, they have said that all Ubuntu apps in a year, maybe even 6 months, if you were to install Ubuntu on your laptop, some of the applications are going to be Flutter applications, but you will have no idea that they're Flutter applications. They're not built in GKE, I mean, whatever Linux applications are built in, GTK, I think. They're built in Flutter. And the powerful thing about that is they can now take those applications and also deploy it if they want to the web, to mobile, to desktop, whatever they want to do with it. And so it's very powerful, the amount of partnerships Google's making. So that's phase one. Phase two was this idea of free upgrades, right? You can take your application and you can hit Flutter upgrade, and automatically most applications will run on web, desktop, mobile for free. And lastly, Google said, we're gonna, show our investment in Flutter by upgrading the Flutter Ads, Google Ads package, the Firebase plugins package, by offering a whole slew of developer tools to help migration easier, like Dart Fix, Dart Migrate, all these tools. And so these 3 avenues that the Flutter team is kind of going down, they're emphasizing that Flutter does have a future. It's a very powerful and strong future, and it continues to grow. So with that, those are the 5, 6, or 7 things that you should know about Flutter 2. And if you have any questions, let's chat about them. And yeah, thank you for listening to my talk.
That's great, Faisal. Thank you. That was great. You give us one extra there. I love it. So I'm just going to go down the questions and then we'll just knock them out. So John M asks, is there any known adoption of using Flutter in the government space? I work in that space and it's hard to get approval when I can't point to other federal agencies that use it. John M, I understand your pain. I'm in the PubSec myself, so I do understand where you're coming from. But what's your feedback on that, Faisal?
I know actually a state in America or a city that has used Flutter. I can't talk about it, but if you email me, John, then I can actually introduce you to the person that actually helped them build their Flutter app out. And that might actually help you. I don't know if it's like NDA or whatever, that's why I'm not going to talk about it here.
Yeah.
But we can do it over private. But it is happening. And I'll tell you what the state or city was doing. They originally had a PhoneGap application that they've been using for a while. And they had they basically went down and they said, which path should we go down? Should we go down the React Native path or should we go down the Flutter path? And I don't know what the internal discussions were because my friend was brought in later, but whatever they decided, they thought that Flutter was the best approach. My friend and his team came in, they built the app, and they really like Flutter. And I think they had recently launched it too. But yes, email me, Faisal, my email's right there on the slides, and then I can make you that intro.
Cool. So Omar Ahmed asks, Omar, I think Ahmed asks, how to make your app lighter in terms of size? So it's a very high level question.
Yes, very high level question, and this depends on your use case. It depends on how big your application is getting. So there's a couple things you can do. Right off the bat, make sure your images are compressed. Use something like PNG Crush or Image Optim, which are all just free tools you can find that compress your images. Next, if you have like random dependencies, whenever I add a dependency, there's a, this is a trade-off. Whenever you add a dependency, it's a trade-off between time and your application size and introducing potential bugs and stuff. So a lot of developers just go on pub and they download dependency and they use it, which is fine. However, if you're concerned about size, then you might look at some of the very easy dependencies. For example, if I go through some of the apps I have some dependency for like a horizontal list view that just adds a certain something, but it's also bringing in a whole slew of other dependencies. So I can just kind of go in, copy that myself and get rid of all the other dependencies, and now I have a slimmer application. So think about that. Now, the last thing I would say is, if after doing all those things, I mean, I'm assuming you haven't even started your developing your application. If you have, then there's nothing else you can do outside of that. There's stuff like when you're publishing it to Play Store or you're publishing it to iOS, that those operating systems, those Play Stores, app stores, will automatically split your application up to be smaller. So I know last year I published an application that was, when you built the APK, it was around 60, 70 megabytes. But when you actually uploaded it to Play Store, after Google converts the, not APK, the AAB, Android application binary, when Google takes the Android application binary and distributes it to their customers, to your users, the download size can be anywhere from like 10 megabytes to 60 megabytes. And that's really based on the architecture of the phone. A 64-bit phone is not going to download a 32-bit binary. And so Google automatically does that splitting for you. However, if you haven't started developing your application, then really think about what you're trying to do. I love Flutter, but if you're developing an application for emerging markets, then Flutter's probably not your first choice, right? Those emerging markets, I would say, say you're developing an application for, a part of India that is not metro, maybe like the village in India. And I say India because I know, I know a lot of friends that are developing this for a lot of villages and stuff, especially payment applications. And what they're doing is they're developing these applications for web apps. They're not using even native Android because they want to use simple web apps that are quick, fast, and probably like, 50 kilobyte download speed, because data is very expensive in these remote parts in India.
Okay, great. So Andres Kwan asks, you kind of answered this when you were talking about the Flutter folio. He asks, what if you want something custom for web or mobile, not specific, platform specific? Can you define what goes to web and what goes to mobile?
Exactly. And so I'm just going to give an example here. I'm going to say, and here's the code. I'm not going to run it, but what you could do is you can go if platform dot, and it's going to give an import. I'm going to import this. If platform dot is Android, is Fuchsia, is iOS, is Linux, is Mac, is Windows, then say I wanted to do something certain, right? If Mac, print this is running on Mac, else this is running elsewhere, right? So in this if statement, you can design your whole application. So what I recommend is look at some of the architecture patterns for iPhone and iPad. While it's not, the code is not the same, but that community there, and I only say iPhone and iPad because Android tablets never took off. But if you look at that community there, then they have kind of built out architecture patterns that you can deal with iOS on a small screen, and then use iPad on a big screen and how they actually architect their code. So kind of look at those architecture patterns for inspiration, but overall, it's fairly straightforward, I think. Platform dot is web, blah, 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 and you'll get the right operating system to run on.
Faisal, on that note, I have also found that looking at the Flutter code to figure out what patterns they're using for what problems, like how they're solving it, that's also a good tip, right? Would you agree?
Yeah, I 100% agree, and I always do that. My command shortcut is command. So if I hit command and I go into like a value here, for example, text editing, I can see the source code. And when I'm looking at the source code, I kind of pick up on these patterns and
Right.
I kind of copy them over. So I highly recommend everyone do that.
Right. Great artists copy, right?
That's for sure.
Okay, so you can create, Etienne Lavallee says, you can create custom layout management based on the platform or screen viewport sizes. He's making a comment. Randall Schwartz is in the house. Okay, so you can also, hey Randall, you can also use conditional imports for things that are specific to Dart.io, Dart.io. Okay, good. And then someone's referring to Jared's previous recording on devcommunity.org. Let's see, I'm trying to get to the questions. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, great presentation. We had, okay, so hi Faisal, great presentation. We had the same issue. It's not working very well with MySQL 8.0. Support for the database is very poor. Do you see if there is any progress on connectivity API?
Yeah, and this is, so for people who might be slightly confused about this comment, Dart also runs not just on mobile. A lot of developers think Dart is only specifically for mobile. Dart was originally for web and server. And I love Dart on the server. And the only reason I moved away was specifically around these connectivity issues. The driver story for Dart server is not too great. There's no easy way to connect to MySQL, MongoDB. The drivers are outdated. There was a framework that I used for the longest time called Aqueduct, I think.
Aqueduct, yep.
Yeah, and Aqueduct was great. They had Postgres support. I actually only started using Postgres because of Aqueduct. And then Aqueduct stopped being supported recently. So unfortunately, I don't have any comments on it. Like, I would be more than happy. I'm sure a lot of developers would be more than happy to pitch in for and like donate to someone if they were to write and maintain a MySQL and Postgres plugin for Dart. But I don't have any like insight on that. Yeah, even my friend has gone burned by that because he just wasn't able to, use the latest MySQL features because the plugin was so behind.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
All right, so Neil Chowdhury asks, what kind of things should we be concerned about regarding third-party libraries out there and upgrading Flutter and Dart?
Most third-party libraries, which are active, have upgraded to Null Safe. And so it should be a fairly easy upgrade for you. There are some that haven't. Those weren't, those are just like the one-off random ones. But what's nice is Pub tells you if they're ready. So if I go to Pub here and I search for, I don't know, let's just search for random. I don't know what random it will give us. Say superhero. This was updated actually at the start of last year. And so this probably is not null safe. So if you're using the superhero package, it probably will complain. So what you could do is you have a couple choices. You can go in and you can fork this repo and upgrade the null safety here, or you can just abandon it and kind of find an alternative, right? Or you can actually take a risk and go, okay, I'm just gonna ignore that because if I look at it, it's probably just like, yeah, this would be perfectly fine to just ignore, right? You don't need to migrate. All it's doing is just doing a random integer on an array. So use your common sense on it. I would say try to abandon the projects that aren't updating, or if it's very key, then fork them and update them and give back to the community.
Cool. And by the way, Faisal, there's an update from Randall on Aqueduct. So
Okay.
there is Viaduct. He says Viaduct is replacing Aqueduct, and active team is working on it. So I guess that's good
Cool.
news, huh?
I didn't know that. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Good.
Cool.
001. Okay. Yeah.
I think I'm spelling it wrong, but
They
yeah.
just started yesterday, I guess.
But
Okay.
that's awesome. Cool.
That's cool. All right. Well, it comes from a reliable source, Randall. I'm sure
Yeah.
he knows. Oh, yeah. So let's see. Lucy asked, no, actually, Johnny asked, app bundles for Android allow only the necessary portions are downloaded by the user. Okay, that's a comment. And so why does Flutter, Lucy asks, why does Flutter make changes to widget names that seem trivial? Raise button to now elevated button. What's the easiest way to fix deprecated widgets? I guess
The
you kind of
easiest way to
answered that.
Yeah, the easiest way to fix deprecated widgets is doing Dart fix.
Right.
Right, and Dart fix should fix those. So let's see if we go here. Let's actually see, because I'm pretty sure I did this and I did fix it. So if I go raise button, which is now deprecated, and I go child text hello, right? It's going to say, hey, this is deprecated. If I go to Dart analysis, whoops, I need to put in a parameter here on pressed. Okay. Now, if I go to Dart analysis, it says raise button is deprecated and shouldn't be used. See elevated button. If I go here and I run Dart fix, let's see my terminal, Dart fix, try run. I am sure it will fix this. Fingers crossed. Come on, come on. Oh, nothing to fix. It won't fix it, unfortunately. Yeah, try replacing it. So why Google did this, I am not sure. Actually, I'm sure there's some like documentation exactly on why they did this, why they changed it. Yeah, this is just deprecated member. I'm not sure why they changed it. Elevated button, I think if I had to guess, I think they changed it to be in line with the material design spec. I don't think the material design spec calls it a raised button. I think it calls it an elevated button. Or they changed it to an elevated button, which is why Google had to change it. Unfortunately, it doesn't work. I thought it would fix it. So there you go. There's some stuff that Dart fix won't fix. But yeah, I'm not too sure why they changed it.
Yeah.
But really, the easiest way to change it is the API for both buttons is fairly similar. You just change it to elevated button and it will just work.
Yeah, Etienne says they had to keep it aligned with the material naming conventions. That's
Yeah.
what he's confirming.
Yeah.
That's cool. Okay. All right, so I have a question, Faisal.
Yes.
So you're an avid consumer of the Flutter toolset. So I guess you would be the good person to ask this question. What is your staple, like couple of packages that you absolutely find yourself going back to every program you write? Like you just, it's a crutch for you and you always use.
Yeah.
Like couple, I don't know, give us like top 3, packages that just really gets you going.
So I've recently started getting a lot into Get It, and it's a service locator pattern. I really like Get It, and this is something that I'm starting to use a lot. You can register your services and be able to like call it anywhere. It reminds me a lot of AngularJS when I used to do that. And so I like it a lot. It's great. The other thing that I absolutely always use, and I think that, Fluro, which is now called, although it's still called Fluro. Fluro is something that I always use
For
my routing.
right?
For my
Yeah.
routing, yes. Even with Navigator 2.0, and I think this just because I've been lazy and I'm so used to Fluro, I've just never bothered to look at Navigator 2.0. I saw like one documentation on it. It seemed way too complicated for what I just wanted to do, which was router define and router navigate too. And so Fluoro, yeah, like it seems way too not complicated. So Fluoro I use all the time. It's like it is the brightest, hippest, coolest router. I do like it. It's always updated as well. And then the other one that I think I use often, and I'm trying to think. I mean, the other ones, obviously, I always just use Firebase regardless of what I'm using. I always use Firebase notifications, Firebase crash reporting, Crashlytics, and then Firebase performance. Those are all really good. But the other one that I use often is Google Fonts. This is a great package. And I don't know how many people are using this, but and this goes back to file size, right? That person, I think it was Omar who had that question. One of the things that take up a lot of size is fonts, especially if your designer gives you like 3-4 fonts to use, you now have almost 2 megabytes of fonts in your application. And so what you can do with Google Fonts package is load them in dynamically. And so they're not bundled in with your application and they're pulled in dynamically as they're needed. And so this is a great way to reduce application size as well and make your applications look pretty.
Nice.
The other thing that I use often, and I'm not sure, and I think this is because I wasn't using Block till only recently, is Future Builder and Stream Builder. I use those two a lot. And when I talk to my friend who's also like a big time Flutter developer, he rarely uses that. He's always surprised that I'm using Feature Builder and Stream Builder because he's using Block and stuff. So now I'm kind of migrating over there. But that's another class that I like a lot because I like the pattern that Stream Builder and Feature Builder give me for most applications.
All right, there's a plug from Johnny, the updater package written by our own Larry. Larry, you wrote that updater package? Is that correct?
Yeah, you got to check it out. It's null safe now.
Cool. Yeah, we got to update. Is it called just updater, right?
Upgrader, I think.
Upgrader.
G.
Upgrader. Oh, my bad. Upgrader. Oh, yeah. Oh, I love this. I actually use this. I forgot about this package. Yeah. This is a great package because
That's so Larry wrote that.
yeah. So I would say there's two things that I use a lot, which is Upgrader, because clients are always like, hey, can we force push an application out to everyone? But then the other one I use is Firebase Remote Config. And I've kind of created, and this is completely going off on a tangent now, but I would recommend everyone do something similar like this. And if you're doing client work, even if you're doing your own work, I have built a class called strings. It shouldn't be called strings. It should be called something else. But what strings does is it uses Firebase Remote Config under the hood. And what Firebase Remote Config is a way to do sort of A/B testing, but also have remote values living inside of Google's UI. And then what I've done is I've created this class called strings, and wherever in my application I have copy, what I do is I go something like strings.getString update copy, right? And now I pass this in a widget. And then when it comes time to update my application or update some copy, I actually just go to Firebase, Google, and I'm going to give you guys an example here. I'm going to go here. So I'll go to something like firebase.google.com. I'll go to this application, Stella's Place, and I'll go to remote config here. And here you can see all the different copy for the application. And the reason why I use remote config, and you might be going, well, why don't I just create like a JSON file somewhere, is because you can now let your product manager, UX person, design non-technical person go into Firebase and update the copy of your application without bothering you. right? And this is super good when you're doing consulting work because the client doesn't have to bother you anymore. You can just tell the client, go to Firebase. The client can go in here and go, you know what? Operator has ended chat, exclamation mark, update. And now it's been pushed out to all the applications, right? And there, no one has to bother me anymore. So highly recommend everyone kind of take a look at Firebase Remote Config. It's a great tool, and I don't know how often it's used in the real world.
Right. Yeah. What about JSON encoding, decoding? You use any library? I'm sure you use a library for that. You're not doing it manually. I hope.
Yeah. I mean, I was actually, for the longest time, I was using this tool, Pojo to Dart, JSON to Dart, where I would paste in my JSON here. So let's go get like a JSON example. Sure, let's grab this. And if I put it in here and I call this glossary, it actually generates the entire Dart code,
nice.
right? So this is great when you're doing like quick applications. Yeah, because it has the parser built in from JSON to JSON. So it's very scalable.
Right, cool. All right, Larry, anything you want to ask or?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Johnny, anything from you, sir?
Nope, all good. This was awesome. Thanks, Faisal.
Cool.
All right, well, I think that's the end of our questions. I don't see any more questions coming. Unless I'm missing it. Let's see.
Michael, did you have anything?
Nah, so my question was kind of already answered with the null safety. So I think Dan Jarvis had asked a question about how does that allow localization easily? And I think that's probably in reference to your last point.
Localization is something that it won't allow, and so you would still have to do. You still have to do localization inside the app, but then you can choose the remote strings to be like _FR_EN.
Okay.
Cool. Well, you just made me realize I missed a question there. I hope I didn't miss any others.
No, I think that was it. I think you covered everything, bro.
Yeah. Wow, Faisal, man, thanks a lot. Another great talk.
No problem.
Right from your living
Thank
room,
you.
right? You don't have to travel anymore. You don't have to come to DC. You don't get
I'd
to have
much rather
dinner.
travel.
Yeah. Next time.
Next time, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Faisal. We really appreciate it. It's a great
Cool. Thanks,
presentation,
everyone.
sir.